The morning Margaret Caldwell handed me that violation notice was the morning I realized some battles choose you, whether you're ready or not. Picture this: 5:45 a.m. on a Wednesday in suburban Denver, and I'm shuffling to my mailbox in sweats and an old Marines t-shirt, wondering why my golden retriever Luna is whimpering at the front window like the world's ending. There it was, taped to my mailbox like some bureaucratic death warrant. Immediate violation notice, screamed in bold red letters that seemed to bleed through the cheap paper. Unauthorized emotional support animal exceeding weight restrictions. Removal required within 72 hours or face $750 daily penalties. I'm reading this garbage while Luna sits beside me, her official service vest catching the morning light because she'd sensed my blood pressure spiking before I even knew why. Here's a 3-year-old professionally trained PTSD service dog, doing exactly what $45,000 worth of VA training taught her to do, and some power-drunk neighbor wants her gone. What would you do if someone tried to eliminate your lifeline? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I guarantee your HOA has its own horror stories brewing. Let me rewind and explain how I ended up in this suburban war zone. My name is Marcus Chen, 36 years old, Navy Cross recipient with 3 Afghanistan deployments and enough blast damage to make airport security interesting. After my marriage imploded 14 months ago, apparently Sarah's yoga instructor offered more than just flexibility training. I needed somewhere Luna and I could rebuild without judgment. Riverside Commons seemed perfect. Upper-middle-class Denver suburb where morning mountain air carries that crisp pine scent mixed with fresh coffee brewing. You can hear sprinkler systems humming across perfect lawns like suburban lullabies. I specifically chose this end unit for the fenced yard where Luna could work off energy without disturbing anyone. Luna isn't your typical dog. She's a 65-pound golden retriever trained specifically for combat PTSD and panic disorder. When my heart rate spikes or my breathing gets ragged, she knows before I do. Pressure therapy, crowd control, flashback interruption. This furry therapist has skills that cost taxpayers $45,000 to develop. But apparently Margaret Caldwell had different plans. Picture every micromanaging middle school principal you ever feared, but with legal authority over your property and a silver Lexus sporting vanity plates, reading HOA MGR. Margaret, 62, relocated here 6 years ago from California and immediately campaigned for HOA president like she was running for city council. She's got this posture that broadcasts, "I need to speak to corporate," shoulders perpetually squared, mouth set in disapproval like she's been taste testing lemons professionally. The woman's a property management consultant who patrols the neighborhood like she's conducting military reconnaissance, timing her evening walks to coincide with residents' dinner routines. I swear she maintains digital files tracking everyone's garbage day compliance. 2 weeks before the violation incident, Margaret appeared at my door at precisely 6:30 p.m. She's obsessively punctual about her intimidation schedule. The cloud of her overpowering vanilla perfume lingered in my doorway like chemical warfare. "Your animal's presence violates size restrictions," she announced, though my neighbor Tom later mentioned he'd never seen Luna exhibit anything but perfect behavior in 6 months. "She's a service animal," I explained calmly, because the VA drills patience with civilians into us PTSD patients. Her response froze my blood. "I don't see any obvious disability here." When I cited ADA regulations about psychiatric service animals, maintaining an educational rather than confrontational tone, Margaret's parting words declared war. Regulations can be interpreted many ways. Delivered with this Arctic smile that made my trauma sensors ping danger. Most neighbors here are decent people. Tom brings Luna organic dog biscuits and shares stories about his late father's Korean War service. The Martinez family waves enthusiastically, and their kids think Luna's cooler than Disney characters. Even Carlos the delivery guy stops to scratch Luna's ears during his rounds. But Margaret controls 4 allies on the 9-member HOA board, creating a majority that can weaponize bureaucracy like a suburban crime syndicate. And she'd been preparing her assault with corporate precision. The setup was methodical. Luna had exactly 1 incident, barked twice at a coyote prowling through trash at midnight. Normal protective behavior any reasonable person would appreciate. But Margaret was waiting with Ring camera footage like some suburban surveillance state, ready to file formal complaints citing Section 12.7 disturbance violations. Here's where it gets interesting. My cybersecurity background makes me exceptionally good at digital investigation. When I started examining our governing documents, I discovered something suspicious. The original 2009 Community Charter explicitly permitted working animals without weight limitations. But the current online version, mysteriously revised in 2021, had deleted that clause entirely. Someone had been editing our legal foundation. That weekend, Tom approached with neighborhood intelligence over craft beer that tasted like liquid truth. Margaret had been recruiting residents to document incidents. Carlos warned me about her interrogations regarding my dog situation. The Martinez family quietly disclosed that Margaret had threatened their pool permit when they declined participating in her documentation campaign. 4 foreclosed homes in our development, all previous targets of Margaret's HOA enforcement campaigns. That's when I understood this wasn't about size restrictions or noise ordinances. This was about real estate manipulation, control, and forcing out residents who didn't match Margaret's profitable suburban vision. Challenge accepted, lady? Margaret didn't hesitate. 48 hours after our doorway confrontation, a certified letter arrived that felt heavy enough to stop bullets. The envelope's thickness screamed expensive legal theatrics, and those aggressive red letters were bleeding through like they had personal vendettas against paper. Inside, Margaret had constructed a bureaucratic weapon of mass destruction. Emergency board session required within 48 hours. Multiple charter violations cited, animal weight restrictions, therapy animal prohibitions, noise ordinances that apparently applied retroactively to that single coyote incident. The letter was copied to all 9 board members, establishing an official documentation trail designed to appear legitimate rather than personal revenge. The ultimatum was crystal clear: appear before the board or face immediate legal proceedings and $750 daily fines. In the crisp morning mountain air, my coffee mug struck the kitchen island harder than intended, the sharp crack echoing through my house like artillery. Luna immediately leaned against my legs, that familiar concerned whine indicating my stress levels were redlining. But here's where Margaret made her first strategic catastrophe. She picked a fight with someone who actually understands research. I spent that evening diving deep into federal disability legislation, recalling something my VA therapist had emphasized during one of our sessions. Federal law always supersedes local regulations when it comes to disability accommodations, she'd explained, describing why my university couldn't impose extra fees for Luna's campus access. The Americans with Disabilities Act isn't negotiable. It's constitutional foundation that private charters can't undermine, regardless of how sophisticated their legal language appears. My cybersecurity training kicked into high gear as I cross-referenced HOA jurisdiction against federal protections. What I discovered would make any civil rights lawyer start calculating settlement figures. HOAs can regulate many things, but they absolutely cannot override federal disability accommodations. Period. End of discussion. Margaret might as well attempt to repeal constitutional amendments. But my digital forensics revealed something even more explosive. Remember those mysteriously altered charters? I'd located the smoking gun buried in cached web pages that Margaret probably assumed had disappeared forever. The original 2009 governing documents explicitly stated that working animals, including but not limited to service dogs, therapy animals, and emotional support animals, were exempt from weight restrictions and breed prohibitions. That protective language had been quietly eliminated in a 2021 routine update that nobody seemed to recall approving. Someone had deliberately sabotaged our legal foundation to remove protections for disabled residents. The next morning brought intelligence from my expanding neighborhood network. Tom appeared at my door with the aroma of fresh bagels clinging to his jacket and fresh intel that made my blood simmer. Margaret had been making rounds like some suburban Stasi agent, recruiting neighbors to document any incidents involving Luna. She'd pressured the Martinez family about installing security cameras for community safety, code for help me build a harassment case. Even Carlos had noticed Margaret's sudden curiosity about my delivery schedule and pointed questions about my dog situation. The woman was constructing a prosecution case like Luna had committed felonies instead of barking at wildlife. But Margaret's surveillance operation was about to backfire more spectacularly than a fireworks factory explosion. My cybersecurity training includes digital evidence preservation, so I'd already begun documenting everything with the systematic precision that once tracked terrorist communications in Kabul. Security cameras covering all property perimeters, time-stamped screenshots of every online interaction, audio recording devices for future encounters, perfectly legal under Colorado's one-party consent statute. Then commenced Margaret's psychological warfare phase. She began driving past my house multiple times daily, her silver Lexus stalking the neighborhood like a predatory shark. The timing was surgical. She'd appear exactly during Luna's exercise time, smartphone ready to capture any behavior she could weaponize as threatening. The scent of her exhaust lingered in the mountain air like territorial marking from some apex predator. Here's where the plot thickened into something worthy of investigative journalism. While documenting Margaret's stalking patterns, I stumbled across property records that revealed her true agenda. 4 homes in our development had been foreclosed in the past 18 months. All 4 families had been subjects of sudden aggressive HOA violation campaigns. All 4 properties had been purchased below market value by buyers represented by Plot Twist, Margaret's property management company. This wasn't random neighbor harassment. This was a systematic real estate manipulation scheme designed to terrorize homeowners into distressed sales that fattened Margaret's consulting fees. I contacted those displaced families over the weekend, and their stories read like a harassment manual, sudden violation notices for microscopic infractions, escalating fines that made selling appear like economic survival, helpful offers from Margaret to assist them escaping the HOA nightmare at bargain prices. The pattern was unmistakable, predatory, and definitely illegal under fair housing legislation. But Margaret had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd targeted a disabled veteran with federal protections, military strategic training, and a service dog whose legal status was bulletproof under constitutional law. As I prepared for the upcoming kangaroo court session, one thing crystallized with laser clarity. This conflict had evolved beyond Luna. This was about protecting future families from a suburban predator who weaponized bureaucracy to steal people's homes. Time to demonstrate to this HOA tyrant what actual justice looks like when you pick the wrong battle. The HOA session was scheduled for Friday evening in the community center, and Margaret had rigged the game like a casino owner with a gambling addiction. She'd assembled her 4-person voting coalition. Patricia, a retired teacher who still carried herself like she was managing detention hall. Robert, a banker who viewed everything through profit-loss calculations. Sandra, an insurance agent who owed Margaret referrals for half her business. And James, a landscaper whose company held our maintenance contract. But Margaret's masterstroke was the community-wide email blast she transmitted 3 days before the session. Subject line: dangerous animals in our family community. The message portrayed Luna as some kind of suburban threat endangering property values and children's well-being, conveniently omitting her federal service animal status or my disability. The aroma of industrial floor wax hit me as I entered that community center, Luna beside me in her official service vest, appearing more professional than half the board members. I'd brought everything: service dog documentation, federal law printouts, and my phone recording everything. Because Colorado's one-party consent law is a beautiful thing. Margaret opened the meeting with parliamentary procedures designed to restrict my speaking time. Robert's rules weaponized by someone who'd clearly been practicing. She'd even acquired a ceremonial gavel because apparently suburban power trips require proper theatrical props. "Mr. Chen," Patricia interrupted when I attempted presenting my ADA documentation, "how do we verify this animal is properly trained? Anyone can purchase a vest online nowadays." That's when Luna demonstrated why the VA invested $45,000 in her training. Without any command from me, she sensed my rising stress and calmly positioned herself across my feet, performing pressure therapy with the precision of medical intervention. The irony was delicious, Luna proving her professional training to people questioning her legitimacy. Patricia shifted uncomfortably, probably realizing Luna's behavioral discipline exceeded her own. I presented the smoking gun evidence about the altered charters, demanding explanation for how working animal protections had mysteriously vanished from our governing documents. Margaret's response was pure corporate deflection. These were routine updates approved by membership vote. "Perfect," I said, maintaining level tone. "I'd appreciate seeing the meeting minutes and voting records for those changes." The silence stretched longer than a Colorado winter. Margaret couldn't produce documentation because the vote never occurred. She'd simply edited the online charters, hoping nobody would notice or challenge her authority. Tom had attended specifically to serve as my character witness, and his testimony was devastating in its simplicity. "Luna's the most well-behaved dog I've encountered in 30 years of dog ownership. Never aggressive, never disruptive. The problem isn't the dog. The problem is manufactured controversy." The room's energy shifted as neighbors realized they were witnessing a rigged tribunal in action. Margaret threatened immediate fines if I continued disrupting proceedings, which was ironic considering I was following proper procedures while she was violating due process rights that even HOAs must respect. The predetermined vote was 5-4 to uphold all violations. But the real victory was exposing Margaret's methods to the community. Several neighbors who'd attended as neutral observers left appearing disturbed by what they'd witnessed. Here's where my weekend research paid dividends in ways Margaret never anticipated. I'd spent hours examining public property records, and the pattern I'd uncovered was more damning than initially realized. Not only had Margaret's company profited from 4 neighborhood foreclosures, but she'd also been the consultant when those same families first purchased homes. She was operating a long-term scam: recruit families to buy properties, wait for them to settle and make improvements that increase value, then manufacture HOA violations to force distressed sales that she could manipulate for massive commissions. It was real estate farming with homeowners as the harvest. After the session, several neighbors approached me privately. The Martinez family requested my attorney's contact information. Apparently, they'd been receiving preliminary violation notices about their fence materials. Tom mentioned escalating pressure about his garden shed, violating aesthetic standards. Even the Johnson family had gotten warnings about their solar panels being too visible from the street. Margaret wasn't just targeting me. She was systematically working through the development, identifying her next victims. The HOA's immediate retaliation was swift and financially brutal. $750 daily fines starting immediately. Formal notice that unpaid violations would result in property liens within 45 days. The ultimate threat: rehome your animal or face foreclosure proceedings. Margaret personally delivered this ultimatum with a sheriff's deputy in tow. Pure intimidation theater designed to make me feel like a criminal instead of a disabled veteran being discriminated against. But her legal threats revealed a crucial weakness I'd been hoping to exploit. During my military intelligence training, we learned that desperate enemies make tactical errors. Margaret's escalating harassment was creating an evidence trail that would be impossible to deny in federal court. I'd already contacted Jennifer Walsh, a veterans' rights attorney who specialized in ADA compliance cases. Her response to Margaret's latest threats was one word: beautiful. Federal civil rights violations carry serious financial penalties, and HOA insurance policies specifically exclude discrimination lawsuits. Every board member would be personally liable if this reached court. That evening, as Luna and I sat in our backyard watching the sunset paint the Rockies in shades of justice, I realized Margaret had just handed me the ammunition to end this war permanently. Margaret's desperation manifested in ways that would make reality TV producers envious. 5 days after the rigged session, she hired a private investigator because apparently stalking me personally wasn't comprehensive enough for her standards. The PI materialized in an unmarked sedan with tinted windows, parking on public street like some discount surveillance operation. This character had telephoto equipment that could probably photograph Luna's microchip from 4 blocks away. He was documenting everything: Luna playing fetch, bathroom breaks, even our morning training sessions where Luna practiced her anxiety response protocols. I'm observing this amateur through my security cameras, thinking he's attempting to capture threatening behavior from a dog whose biggest menace is excessive friendliness. Meanwhile, Margaret escalated to psychological warfare that crossed every ethical boundary imaginable. She somehow obtained my ex-wife's contact information, probably through that same PI, and started fishing for character information about my mental stability. Sarah, to her credit, told Margaret exactly where she could file her harassment campaign, but the privacy violation was breathtaking. The stench of desperation was getting stronger than Denver smog in summer. Then came the animal control incident that proved Margaret had lost all connection to reality. She filed a complaint claiming Luna was unlicensed and potentially dangerous, which brought Officer Rodriguez to my door on a Thursday morning. The poor guy looked embarrassed before he even started talking. "Sir, I have to investigate a complaint about an unlicensed dog, but I'm looking at what appears to be a federal service animal," he said, gesturing to Luna's official vest and the documentation folder I'd already prepared. I handed over Luna's paperwork: service animal registration, current vaccination, city license, and federal ADA certification. Officer Rodriguez reviewed everything with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen too many complaints. "Mr. Chen, this is clearly a fraudulent report," he said, shaking his head. "False animal control complaints are actually misdemeanor offenses under Colorado law. We get numerous of these from HOA disputes, and frankly, I'm tired of wasting taxpayer resources on neighborhood grudges." Here's something most people don't realize. Filing false reports with government agencies isn't just annoying, it's criminal. Officer Rodriguez recognized Margaret from previous frivolous complaints and was building his own case against her pattern of abuse. But Margaret's real masterpiece of self-destruction was her social media campaign. She created multiple anonymous accounts to spread rumors about my fraudulent PTSD diagnosis and unstable veteran behavior. The posts included photos of Luna without her service vest, taken during her off-duty time in my backyard, attempting to make her appear like an ordinary pet instead of medical necessity. My cybersecurity background made tracing these accounts back to Margaret's IP address easier than finding snow in Colorado. Every defamatory post, every privacy violation, every attempt to undermine my disability status was being documented with forensic precision that would make prosecutors weep with joy. The community backlash against Margaret was building like a Rocky Mountain thunderstorm. Tom organized an impromptu Luna Appreciation Committee that brought homemade treats and moral support. The Martinez family posted a yard sign reading "We support our veterans" that faced directly toward Margaret's house. Even Carlos started taking extra time to interact with Luna during deliveries, making sure Margaret could observe the community solidarity from her surveillance windows. Here's where the plot thickened beyond my wildest expectations. My journalist contact at the Denver Business Review had been investigating HOA corruption for months, and my case was precisely the smoking gun she needed. While researching Margaret's property management connections, she uncovered financial records showing Margaret's company was hemorrhaging money from multiple lawsuits over undisclosed property defects. Margaret wasn't just operating a foreclosure scam, she was facing bankruptcy and desperately needed commission income from forced neighborhood sales to avoid losing her own home. Her attack on me wasn't just discrimination. It was financial survival wrapped in bureaucratic terrorism. The desperation explained everything. The escalating surveillance, the criminal complaints, the character assassination campaign. Margaret was a cornered animal fighting for her economic life, and disabled veterans were apparently acceptable collateral damage. But her biggest mistake was underestimating military strategic thinking. While she was busy playing amateur detective with surveillance cameras, I was building a federal civil rights case that would make her harassment campaign look like a tactical nuclear weapon pointed at her own face. My attorney, Jennifer Walsh, had reviewed all evidence and delivered a verdict that made my Navy Cross feel lighter. Marcus, this is the clearest pattern of disability discrimination I've encountered in 12 years of practice. Federal law doesn't just protect you, it's about to make Margaret personally liable for damages that could reach 6 figures. Every board member who'd voted to uphold discriminatory violations would face individual lawsuits. The HOA's insurance wouldn't cover civil rights violations, meaning personal assets were at risk. As I watched Margaret's Lexus cruise past my house for the 5th time that day, I realized she'd just spent 4 weeks building the evidence case that would destroy her career, her finances, and her suburban empire. Sometimes the best strategy is letting your enemy defeat themselves while you document everything for court. Sometimes the universe delivers justice wrapped in public property records and a generous helping of cosmic irony. While Margaret was busy playing suburban surveillance state with her telephoto lenses and fraudulent complaints, I decided to apply my investigative skills to a different target, Margaret herself. What I discovered made my military intelligence training feel like preparation for this exact moment. Remember how Margaret weaponized charter violations against everyone else? Turns out our HOA dictator had been living in a glass house while throwing stones for 4 solid years. Her property survey, available through Jefferson County records, revealed violations so blatant they'd make a corrupt politician blush. That beautiful pergola she used for client meetings? Built 24 inches too close to the property line, violating setback requirements clearly spelled out in the same charters she'd been quoting like gospel. Her decorative stone wall exceeded height restrictions by 2 feet, ironically installed to hide the unpermitted storage building she'd been using as her property management office. But here's the kicker that made me laugh so hard. Luna came over to check my mental status. Margaret had been operating an unlicensed commercial business from residential property for over 4 years. City zoning records showed no permits for home-based property management operations. Tax filings revealed she'd been claiming commercial deductions for that storage office, while the HOA charters explicitly prohibited business activities in residential zones. Using Margaret's own fee structure against her violations, she owed approximately $67,000 in accumulated fines. The woman who'd been threatening my home with foreclosure had been living in Violation City since before I'd even moved to the development. The irony was so thick you could build houses with it. My VA therapist had taught me something valuable during those early PTSD sessions. Sometimes people project their own guilt onto others as a defense mechanism. Margaret's aggressive enforcement against everyone else was classic psychological displacement. She was terrified of her own rule-breaking being discovered, so she attacked others to deflect attention from her hypocrisy. But discovering Margaret's violations created a moral dilemma that kept me awake despite Luna's calming presence. I could file complaints immediately and watch her world burn, but that felt like becoming the same kind of bully she'd been. Military honor doesn't disappear just because you're fighting dirty opponents. Instead, I realized this information was better used as strategic leverage rather than a nuclear weapon. Margaret's violations gave me the ultimate insurance policy, mutually assured destruction that could end her harassment campaign without destroying her life completely. The legal implications were staggering. HOA board members aren't exempt from their own rules. If anything, their position makes violations more serious because it demonstrates selective enforcement and potential corruption. Jennifer Walsh explained that discrimination cases become slam dunks when you can prove the accuser is violating the same rules they're weaponizing against protected classes. This creates what we call prosecutorial misconduct in the civilian world, she said, barely containing her excitement. Margaret's been selectively enforcing rules while violating them herself. That's textbook discrimination with a side of fraud. Every threatening letter Margaret had sent, every fine she'd imposed, every violation she'd cited became evidence of a rigged system designed to target specific residents while protecting her own illegal activities. But the most beautiful part, Margaret's own surveillance and documentation obsession had created a paper trail proving she knew about charter enforcement, while simultaneously violating multiple charters herself. Her meticulous record-keeping would become the evidence that buried her authority permanently. I had the power to end this war immediately, but something my drill instructor taught me echoed in my mind. The best victories are the ones where your enemy defeats themselves. Margaret was digging her own grave with every escalation. My job was to keep documenting while she buried herself deeper. That evening, watching the sunset paint the Rockies in shades of poetic justice, I sealed all evidence in an envelope addressed to Jennifer Walsh and prepared multiple strategies depending on Margaret's next moves. Luna and I had gone from defense to offense without firing a single shot. Sometimes patience and preparation beat aggression and intimidation. Margaret was about to learn that lesson the hard way. War requires allies, and I was about to assemble a team that would make Margaret's HOA power trip look like amateur hour. Time to transform this neighborhood dispute into a masterclass in community organizing with federal law backing. First recruit, Jennifer Walsh from Veterans Legal Services, a civil rights attorney who specialized in ADA compliance and maintained a personal vendetta against discriminatory HOAs. During our strategy session in her downtown Denver office, surrounded by law books that smelled like justice and old leather, Jennifer laid out the nuclear option. Federal civil rights complaints carry serious financial penalties, she explained, spreading case precedents across her desk like battle plans. The beautiful thing about ADA violations is that federal law doesn't just protect you, it creates personal liability for anyone who willfully violates disability protections. HOA board members can be sued individually, and their insurance won't cover civil rights violations. That last part was the golden bullet I'd been hoping for. Most people don't realize HOA insurance policies specifically exclude discrimination lawsuits, meaning board members' personal assets become fair game when they violate federal law. Community organizer number 2, Tom, who'd transformed from quiet neighbor into suburban resistance leader practically overnight. The retired engineer had connections throughout the development that would make a political campaign manager jealous. His Luna Defense Fund started with a coffee can in his garage and grew into a legitimate legal expense account within days. Most neighbors are afraid of Margaret, he told me over craft beer that tasted like liquid courage. But more neighbors are angry about bullying a good veteran. We organize quietly, then strike loudly. Tom's barbecue brigade became an intelligence network disguised as social gatherings. Every weekend cookout, every evening walk, every grocery store encounter became an opportunity to document Margaret's harassment pattern and recruit supporters. Tech support came from an unexpected source, Maria Martinez, the 19-year-old across the street who'd been following this drama like her personal Netflix series. The college sophomore had digital skills that made my IT background look like stone tablets, and she'd been documenting Margaret's social media harassment campaign with the methodical precision of a federal prosecutor. Mr. Chen, I've got screenshots of every fake account she created, Maria said, pulling up files organized better than most corporate databases. She's been posting defamatory content about your PTSD diagnosis, which violates both state privacy laws and federal disability protections. Plus, I traced her IP addresses, so we have digital fingerprints for everything. My fourth ally emerged from within enemy territory. Robert, the banker board member who'd been growing increasingly uncomfortable with Margaret's methods. During a chance encounter at the neighborhood Starbucks, where the aroma of espresso mixed with his obvious moral conflict, Robert pulled me aside. Listen, I voted with Margaret because I thought this was about legitimate rule enforcement, he said, studying his latte like it held answers. But her behavior since the hearing has been unprofessional, potentially illegal, and definitely not what I signed up for. If she keeps escalating, I might have to reconsider my position. The community organizing tactics spread like wildfire through social networks, both digital and analog. Regular dog park meetings became strategy sessions where neighbors shared intelligence about Margaret's surveillance activities. A neighborhood petition supporting service animal rights collected 73 signatures within 5 days, with residents adding personal messages about their own experiences with Margaret's harassment. My cybersecurity background proved invaluable for evidence collection and digital forensics. Motion-activated cameras with cloud backup prevented evidence tampering. Audio recording equipment prepared for all future HOA interactions, perfectly legal under Colorado's one-party consent laws. Every harassing email, threatening letter, and surveillance incident was being documented with forensic precision that would make FBI agents proud. The media preparation phase involved my journalist contact at the Denver Business Review, who'd been building her own investigative piece about HOA corruption patterns across Colorado. My case provided the human interest angle she needed. This story has everything, she said during our background interview. Disability discrimination, real estate fraud, community organizing, and a service dog who's more professional than the people trying to ban her. National outlets are going to love this. But the most crucial element of our strategy was understanding Margaret's psychological profile. Military intelligence training teaches you to analyze enemy motivations, and Margaret's pattern was textbook narcissistic control addiction. She needed to dominate others to feel powerful, which meant she'd inevitably overreach in public where witnesses could document her true character. Our plan was elegant in its simplicity: create situations where Margaret would reveal herself to the community while we maintained dignity and legal high ground. Let her hang herself with her own behavior while building an unassailable federal case. The evidence vault was complete: chronological harassment timeline, audio-video recordings of discriminatory meetings, financial documentation of Margaret's real estate scam, and digital forensics proving her defamation campaign. Luna's role remained the same: continue being the perfect service animal while serving as a living symbol of dignity versus petty bureaucracy. 12 days until the next HOA board meeting. Time to let Margaret dig her grave deeper while we prepared to bury her authority permanently. Margaret's desperation reached levels that would make reality TV producers salivate. With her authority crumbling and the community turning against her, she pivoted to sabotage tactics that crossed from petty harassment into actual criminal behavior. First came the bribery attempt that proved she'd completely lost touch with reality. Margaret approached Jake Morrison, our city building inspector, during his lunch break at a downtown deli. The conversation, which Jake later reported to the ethics office, went exactly like you'd expect from someone whose moral compass had been spinning wildly for months. "There must be something wrong with that veteran's property," she told him, sliding an envelope across the table. "Code violations, safety issues, anything that would require immediate action." Jake, a 15-year city employee who'd seen every corruption attempt imaginable, recorded the conversation on his phone before politely explaining that attempted bribery of public officials was a federal crime. Margaret's face apparently went through more color changes than a Colorado sunset before she grabbed her purse and fled. The ethics complaint was filed within hours, creating an official misconduct investigation against our HOA president. Jake became an unexpected ally, warning me about future false complaints while documenting Margaret's attempt to weaponize city government for personal vendettas. But Margaret's real masterpiece of self-destruction was her social media smear campaign that escalated into digital stalking. She'd created a network of fake accounts across Facebook, Nextdoor, and Instagram, posting carefully cropped photos of Luna during her off-duty time to make her appear aggressive. These posts claimed I was faking disability for special treatment and sharing private medical information she'd somehow obtained through her PI surveillance. Maria Martinez's digital forensic skills proved invaluable here. The college student had traced every anonymous account back to Margaret's home IP address and documented timestamps showing the posts were being created during her known surveillance activities. We had digital fingerprints connecting her to cyberbullying, defamation, and medical privacy violations. "Mrs. Caldwell really doesn't understand how the internet works," Maria told me, pulling up network analysis that looked like something from CSI Cyber. "She's been using the same passwords, posting patterns, and even linguistic quirks across all her fake accounts. A first-year computer science student could prove this is the same person." The community response to Margaret's increasingly unhinged behavior was building like a Rocky Mountain thunderstorm. The Luna support rally that Tom organized drew over 80 residents to the community park, with local veterans groups adopting our cause as a broader discrimination case. Someone had even created "We Stand with Luna" yard signs that began appearing throughout the development like suburban protest art. Margaret's retaliation was swift and vindictive. Residents who'd publicly supported me started receiving violation notices for microscopic infractions. Mailbox posts painted the wrong shade of white, grass growing half an inch too tall, porch lights that were apparently too bright for community standards. Her systematic intimidation campaign was creating more enemies than a politician during election season. The breaking point came when Margaret escalated to attacking my livelihood. She contacted my employer's HR department, claiming I was an unstable veteran whose service dog posed workplace safety risks during video conferences. She filed a fraudulent OSHA complaint about dangerous animals in home offices and began calling my clients directly with warnings about my mental instability. That's where Margaret discovered she'd picked the wrong target and definitely the wrong company. My employer, a cybersecurity firm that valued diversity in veteran hiring, responded to her harassment campaign by offering their legal team's assistance and publicly supporting my accommodation rights. Their HR director actually thanked me for bringing the discrimination to their attention because it helped them identify potential bias in their vendor relationships. The employment attack backfired so spectacularly that Margaret's property management license became threatened. Her harassment of a disabled veteran's workplace violated fair housing laws and professional conduct standards. The state licensing board opened an investigation based on my employer's formal complaint, but Margaret's psychological breakdown was becoming visible to the entire neighborhood. Late-night drive-bys past my house increased to multiple times per evening. She began leaving threatening notes about final warnings regarding Luna's presence. Door-to-door campaigns to poison community opinion fell flat when neighbors realized they were listening to increasingly unhinged rants about fake veterans and dangerous animals. The final straw was her confrontation with Tom outside the grocery store, where Margaret accused the retired engineer of harboring supporters of dangerous dogs and demanded he stop bringing Luna treats. Tom, disturbed by the aggressive behavior, called police to report harassment. Officer Rodriguez, who'd investigated the fraudulent animal control complaint, recognized the escalation pattern immediately. He issued Margaret an official warning about stalking behavior and documented the incident as part of an ongoing harassment case. 4 HOA board members privately approached me that week, requesting meetings to discuss resolving the situation before it gets worse. Robert publicly withdrew his support for Margaret's methods. Patricia expressed concerns about professional reputation damage. Even Sandra worried about her insurance connections being compromised by association. The trap was perfectly set. All that remained was letting Margaret spring it herself at the upcoming board meeting where the entire community would witness her final meltdown. Margaret's final acts of desperation made her previous behavior look like polite disagreement. With her authority evaporating and criminal investigations mounting, she launched a last-ditch campaign that crossed every legal and moral boundary imaginable. The attempted dog theft was so brazenly illegal it belonged in a crime drama. While I was at a VA appointment, Margaret hired a private animal removal service, basically a guy with a truck who advertised on Craigslist. She told him Luna was an abandoned, dangerous dog that needed immediate seizure for public safety. Fortunately, Tom was working in his yard when this amateur showed up with a catch pole and official-looking paperwork that turned out to be completely fabricated. His panicked call brought me racing home to find Luna safely inside while a very confused contractor tried to explain why he thought stealing a federal service animal was legitimate work. The contractor immediately cooperated with police when he realized he'd been hired for what amounted to felony theft. Colorado law treats service animal theft as a serious crime, with penalties including mandatory restitution and potential federal charges. The attempted seizure created another criminal complaint against Margaret, who was rapidly building a rap sheet longer than a pharmacy receipt. But her psychological warfare reached new lows with the fabricated bite incident that proved she'd completely abandoned reality. Margaret filed a police report claiming Luna had bitten a neighborhood child, providing detailed descriptions of injuries that supposedly required medical treatment. The investigation lasted exactly 6 hours. No child had been treated for dog bites at any local medical facility. No parents had reported incidents involving Luna. The victim Margaret described didn't even exist in our development. When pressed for specifics, her story changed multiple times before she claimed the family had moved away to avoid further trauma. Officer Rodriguez, who was becoming familiar with Margaret's pattern of false reports, cited her for filing fraudulent police complaints, a misdemeanor that would appear on background checks for her property management license renewal. "Ma'am, this is the 4th false report you filed in 6 weeks, he told her, according to the incident report I later obtained. False police reports waste taxpayer resources and are criminal offenses. Consider this your final warning before we pursue charges. The community protection network that had formed around Luna and me was operating like a neighborhood watch program designed to monitor the watchers. Tom organized 24-hour surveillance schedules disguised as concerned neighbor check-ins. Maria Martinez and her friends created a group chat that tracked Margaret's Lexus movements with military precision. Even Carlos started timing his deliveries to ensure Luna was never alone during outdoor activities. But Margaret's most catastrophic mistake was obtaining and sharing my confidential VA medical records. During a community meeting about snow removal policies, yes, she managed to weaponize winter planning. She stood up and began reading details about my PTSD diagnosis and treatment history. The room went dead silent as neighbors realized they were witnessing a federal crime in progress. HIPAA violations carry serious penalties, but sharing protected medical information in a public forum to harass a disabled person elevates the offense to potential felony territory. Jennifer Walsh nearly dropped her coffee when I called about the medical privacy violation. "Marcus, this is prosecutorial gold. Medical privacy laws don't mess around, and using protected health information to discriminate against disabled individuals is exactly what federal civil rights legislation was designed to prevent." The Veterans Legal Services Organization immediately filed complaints with both the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Justice. Margaret had just handed us a federal case that could result in 6-figure penalties and potential criminal charges. Meanwhile, the professional consequences were mounting like Denver traffic during rush hour. Her property management clients began requesting different consultants after witnessing her increasingly erratic behavior. The local real estate association quietly distanced itself from her practices. Insurance companies started asking pointed questions about liability exposure for consultants under criminal investigation. My investigative work revealed the final piece of Margaret's corruption puzzle: embezzlement of HOA funds. Pool maintenance contracts had been inflated to cover spa services at her personal residence. Landscaping bills included work performed on her private property. She'd been using community funds as her personal piggy bank for over 3 years. The financial fraud exposure created criminal liability beyond civil violations, and the evidence was hiding in plain sight within HOA financial records that any resident could request under Colorado law. Margaret's psychological breakdown became visible to anyone paying attention. Public outbursts at the grocery store about fake veterans taking advantage of real disabilities. Confrontational behavior toward other service dogs at the community park. Social media rants that revealed mental instability concerning enough that friends and family began expressing worry about her judgment. The final trap was set when Margaret announced her intention to have Luna destroyed as a dangerous animal, claiming authority as HOA president to override federal protections. This public statement, recorded by multiple witnesses on Maria's ever-present phone camera, created the perfect setup for our ultimate confrontation. Luna remained the perfect professional throughout this chaos, demonstrating service animal behavior that contrasted beautifully with the surrounding human hysteria. Community children were literally asking their parents why adults couldn't behave as well as the dog everyone was fighting about. 8 days until the next board meeting where Margaret would face a room full of witnesses, media attention, and the consequences of 4 months spent digging her own professional grave. The community center had never seen drama like this. 90-plus residents packed into a space designed for 50, with local media crews setting up cameras and veterans advocacy groups sending representatives. The air crackled with tension thicker than Denver smog, and you could smell the anticipation mixed with industrial carpet cleaner and nervous sweat. Margaret called the meeting to order with her ceremonial gavel, trying to project authority while surrounded by hostile faces and recording devices. She dressed for battle in a power suit that screamed, "I'm definitely not having a breakdown," but her hands shook slightly as she shuffled through papers that would soon become evidence. "Tonight we address the ongoing violation of community safety standards," she announced, her voice carrying that shrill edge of someone who knows they're cornered. "Federal disability laws do not supersede private charter enforcement, and this board will not be intimidated by legal threats." That opening statement was so legally wrong it made Jennifer Walsh visibly wince. Federal law absolutely supersedes private charters when it comes to disability accommodations. That's literally the entire point of civil rights legislation. I entered with Luna wearing her full service vest, documentation folder in hand, and the quiet confidence that comes from having federal law on your side. The crowd's energy shifted immediately as neighbors saw us together, the professional service dog and the veteran she was trained to protect, facing down suburban tyranny with dignity intact. Tom stood first during public comment, his voice carrying the moral authority of someone who'd lived through actual adversity. "Luna is the most well-behaved dog I've encountered in my 30 years as a dog owner. She helps a good man heal from war. Margaret is the problem, not the dog. This community knows the truth." The Martinez family presented their petition with 73 signatures supporting service animal rights, including personal testimonials from neighbors who'd witnessed Luna's exemplary behavior. Local veterinarian Dr. Michael Stevens testified about Luna's temperament evaluation, describing her as one of the most professionally trained animals I've encountered in 18 years of practice. 4 military veterans in attendance stood simultaneously during my testimony, a silent show of solidarity that made the room's emotional temperature spike. When I calmly presented our chronological evidence of harassment, explaining federal ADA protections in terms everyone could understand, you could hear neighbors connecting dots about Margaret's systematic abuse of authority. "Service animals have the same access rights as wheelchairs," I explained, making eye contact with board members who were realizing their legal exposure. "Federal law doesn't recognize HOA exceptions to disability accommodations." That's when Jennifer Walsh rose to present the federal civil rights complaint, and Margaret's face went through color changes that would make a rainbow jealous. The attorney's presentation was surgical: disability discrimination, selective enforcement patterns, and personal liability for board members who'd violated federal law. "The HOA's insurance policy specifically excludes civil rights violations," Jennifer explained to visibly uncomfortable board members. "Individual board members face personal financial liability for willful discrimination against disabled residents." Margaret's meltdown was spectacular and thoroughly documented. She interrupted the attorney's presentation with shouting about fake veterans and disability fraud, demanding to see proof of invisible disabilities while news cameras captured every unhinged moment. "This man faked military service to get special privileges for his oversized dog," she screamed, her composure completely shattered. "I don't believe any of his so-called PTSD diagnosis." The room erupted. Multiple neighbors stood to defend my service record. Robert, the banker board member, publicly apologized for enabling harassment. Patricia called for an immediate vote of no confidence while Sandra tried to distance herself from the sinking ship. The Denver Business Review reporter seized the moment, asking Margaret to explain her own property violations while cameras rolled. Watching her deny photographic evidence of unpermitted structures and unlicensed business operations created viral video content that would haunt her professional reputation forever. Board members follow different standards than regular residents, she declared, apparently unaware that admitting to selective enforcement on camera was prosecutorial gold. Then came the nuclear option. Jennifer Walsh presented the complete dossier of Margaret's violations: pergola setback violations, wall height infractions, unpermitted storage office, and financial records proving embezzlement of HOA maintenance funds. Officer Rodriguez arrived to serve Margaret with a restraining order protecting Luna and me from further harassment, creating perfect visual drama as authority protected victims from their abuser. The legal papers rustled like justice being served, while Margaret realized her harassment campaign had generated official police protection for her targets. The board vote was swift and decisive. Margaret removed as president 7-0 with her abstaining while muttering about conspiracies. Secondary motion rescinding all Luna-related violations passed unanimously. The board formally apologized and voted to reimburse our legal fees from HOA funds. Margaret's final exit was pure theater. She refused to accept removal, threatened to sue the entire neighborhood for defamation, and stormed out screaming about fake veterans and rigged elections while news cameras captured her Lexus speeding away from the community she'd terrorized for months. Luna remained calm throughout the chaos, performing pressure therapy during my stress peaks and accepting congratulatory pets from dozens of supporters. She'd become the unofficial neighborhood mascot and living symbol of dignity, triumphing over petty tyranny. The celebration in the community center after Margaret's departure felt like Liberation Day, with Tom elected as interim president and emergency policy revisions scheduled to prevent future abuse of authority. 8 months later, Riverside Commons had transformed from suburban battlefield into a model community that housing advocacy groups now study as an example of inclusive governance. The new HOA board, led by President Tom Wilson, implemented transparent enforcement policies and established Luna's Law, federal service animal protections with educational resources for residents who might not understand disability accommodations. Margaret's consequences unfolded like dominoes falling in slow motion. Criminal charges for false police reports and HIPAA violations resulted in probation and mandatory community service at a veterans rehabilitation center. Poetic justice that even Hollywood couldn't have scripted better. Her property management license was suspended pending ethics investigations, and the embezzlement charges forced her to sell her violation-riddled house to pay legal fees and restitution. The restraining order prevented any contact with Luna or me, which turned out to be unnecessary since Margaret moved to Colorado Springs shortly after losing her home. Sometimes karma doesn't need help, it just needs documentation and federal law enforcement. My personal victory extended far beyond winning a neighborhood dispute. The community support network that formed during our fight became genuine friendships that helped my PTSD recovery more than any medication. Luna's training was publicly validated through the most comprehensive real-world test imaginable, and our home finally became the healing sanctuary I'd originally sought. The federal civil rights settlement created a $75,000 legal fund for veterans facing similar discrimination, administered through Veterans Legal Services with Jennifer Walsh overseeing cases. We'd turned our individual struggle into systemic change that would protect future disabled veterans from HOA harassment campaigns. The case became required reading for veterans advocacy training programs nationwide, and Jennifer uses our documentation as a teaching example for building bulletproof civil rights cases. The key lesson she emphasizes: document everything, because harassment evidence builds powerful federal lawsuits that create real financial consequences for discriminatory behavior. Our story inspired similar cases across the country to seek legal recourse instead of suffering in silence. Luna became an unofficial therapy dog for other PTSD veterans, not in any professional capacity, but through informal community connections that formed around our shared experiences with invisible disabilities and the service animals that make normal life possible. The ripple effects reached the HOA industry itself, where insurance companies began requiring disability compliance training. After our case demonstrated the financial risks of federal civil rights violations, property management companies started hiring legal consultants to review enforcement policies because nobody wanted to face the kind of personal liability exposure that destroyed Margaret's career. The community transformation was remarkable. Annual Service Animal Appreciation Day festivals now raise money for veteran services while educating neighbors about disability accommodations. The dog park established with recovered embezzlement funds became a gathering place where Luna plays with dozens of four-legged friends, including the Labrador mix owned by the military family who bought Margaret's former house. Property values actually increased due to positive national media attention about our inclusive community governance. Veterans' families specifically seek out Riverside Commons because they know they'll find support rather than harassment for their service-connected disabilities and accommodation needs. 1 year later, I'm thriving in an environment where neighbors wave instead of spy, where Luna can perform her service duties without documentation challenges, and where community meetings focus on improvements rather than intimidation. The irony isn't lost on me that Margaret's harassment campaign created exactly the opposite of what she intended: a stronger, more connected neighborhood that actively protects its most vulnerable residents. The social good initiative we established continues growing. Luna's Fun Scholarship program has provided service dog training assistance to 15 veterans, with annual fundraisers raising over $40,000 for local veteran services. Community partnerships with the VA Medical Center bring PTSD awareness events that help civilian neighbors understand military trauma while connecting veterans with resources and support networks. Tom, now 67 and still bringing homemade dog biscuits, summarizes the transformation best. Good people make good neighborhoods when they stand together against bullies. His simple wisdom captures what we learned. Communities are strongest when they protect their most vulnerable members rather than targeting them for elimination. Here's the bottom line: federal protections for disabled Americans exist specifically for situations like ours. When you know your rights and document violations, standing up to bullies doesn't just protect yourself. It creates safer spaces for everyone who comes after you. Share your HOA nightmare stories in the comments below. Let's expose these power-hungry bullies and help other people know their rights. And don't forget to subscribe for more justice stories where the good guys actually win, because sometimes fighting back isn't about revenge. It's about building a better world, one neighborhood at a time. That's a wrap for today's episode on HOA Stories. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, smash that like button, comment your thoughts, and let us know if you've dealt with HOA madness too. Subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA story where justice prevails.